This week, Idaho County Sheriff's deputies and the coroner investigated remains found in that area. A hunter initially made the discovery and notified authorities. Officials say bones and a human skull were recovered.
From an experienced hiker mysteriously disappearing in the woods to his camera revealing eerie humanoid ape-like photos, these Bigfoot sightings confirm everything. Let's dive in. Trip gone wrong. In the fall of 2010, Todd Hofflander, a 39-year-old seasoned outdoorsman, set out on what he thought would be a routine hunting trip in the Sawtooth wilderness of Idaho. He was accompanied by his close friend Jeff and his loyal black Labrador, Ruby. Todd was no stranger to the wilderness. He had spent years exploring the great outdoors, always well prepared for his adventures. This trip was no different. He packed his gear, including a .357 Magnum revolver for protection, camping supplies, and enough food to last several days. He was ready for anything. At least that's what he thought. Their destination was Seven Devils Mountain, a rugged and imposing peak known for its tough terrain and steep slopes. It was prime hunting season for blacktail deer, and Todd and Jeff were eager to bag a trophy buck while enjoying the breathtaking views of Hell's Canyon, one of the deepest gorges in North America. The plan was simple, a 4-day trek filled with adventure and the thrill of the hunt. However, as the days passed, the wilderness proved to be unpredictable. By the third day of their trip, Todd began to experience severe knee pain. The aches slowed their progress, and concerns grew about whether they could complete their journey on time. Jeff, trying to make the best of the situation, suggested they rest in a flat area where Todd could recover while he continued toward their destination. Jeff promised to return later, and to ensure Todd's safety, he even called his father, Steve, to join him for the return leg of the trip. The plan seemed sound enough. Todd would stay put, resting and healing, while Jeff and Steve completed the trek and returned to pick him up. However, when Jeff and Steve returned to the meeting spot, Todd was gone, and so was Ruby. There was no sign of him, no tracks, no note, and no indication of where he might have gone. What should have been a short detour turned into the beginning of a decade-long mystery. As the days turned into weeks, search teams searched the wilderness, but no trace of Todd was ever found. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Over the years, numerous theories emerged. Had he fallen victim to the dangerous terrain, or encountered a wild animal, or was something far more sinister at play? Worried about his safety, Jeff wasted no time reporting Todd's disappearance to the authorities. The response was immediate. The police launched a massive search operation across the sprawling Sawtooth wilderness. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning the rugged terrain, while highly trained search dogs combed the forest floor. Search teams ventured deep into the steep valleys, navigating dangerous cliffs and dense thickets, but no trace of Todd was found. Not a footprint, not a clue. He had simply vanished into thin air. As the search stretched on with no leads, suspicions began to arise. The sheriff's office called Jeff in for questioning, hoping to shed some light on what had happened. Jeff was given a polygraph test, but the results only deepened the mystery. His responses were inconsistent, and to the investigators' surprise, he failed the test. This made people suspect Jeff, raising eyebrows among the search team and the community. Could he be hiding something? Jeff denied any involvement in Todd's disappearance. His father, Steve, backed him up, insisting they had nothing to do with it. In a fit of rage, Steve stormed into the police station, demanding answers and questioning why they were wasting time accusing his son. Todd needed help, and they were looking in the wrong place. His frustration was evident, but it wasn't enough to shake the growing doubts about Jeff's role in the tragedy. Meanwhile, the investigation turned to Todd's family. The sheriff interviewed Todd's wife, Julie, hoping for any insight that might steer the search in a new direction. What she shared only complicated matters further. She painted an unsettling picture of Jeff, describing him as unreliable, hot-headed, and even aggressive at times. Julie revealed that Jeff often teased Todd, poking fun at him in ways that bordered on cruelty. He had a history of breaking promises and even mistreating his own pet dog. Worse still, Julie claimed Jeff had made inappropriate jokes and comments toward her on more than one occasion. Mysterious phone call. As the investigation continued, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The sheriff's office received a mysterious phone call from a couple hiking in the mountains. They had come across a black Labrador wandering the wilderness. The dog seemed lost but friendly, and something about her struck a chord with them. When they returned to town, they spotted a missing dog poster and immediately called the authorities. It was Ruby, Todd's loyal companion. When Todd's family saw Ruby, they confirmed it without hesitation. Aside from being a little dehydrated, she was remarkably healthy for a dog that had been lost in the wild for days. But something was odd. Ruby's collar and dog pack were missing. It was as if someone or something had removed them. The discovery of Ruby reignited hope. If she had survived, perhaps Todd had too. The police theorized that he might still be trapped somewhere in the valley, injured but alive. Determined to use Ruby as their guide, the search team brought her back to the rugged mountain range, hoping her instincts would lead them to Todd. But what they encountered instead was deeply unsettling. Ruby's demeanor changed the moment her paw touched the forest floor. She barked incessantly, her tail tucked tightly between her legs, trembling as if gripped by an unseen terror. At times, she whimpered and cowered, refusing to move forward. It was as though she could sense something dangerous lurking in the shadows of the mountains, something that filled her with fear. Undeterred, the authorities pressed forward. On October 6th, they launched yet another large-scale search operation in the area where Ruby had been found. Search teams searched the dense forests and steep cliffsides, methodically combing through every possible location Todd might have entered. Helicopters crisscrossed the skies while search dogs sniffed out potential trails below. Julie, desperate for answers, even brought in Lynn May, a clairvoyant from California, to assist in the search. Lynn's vision was chilling. She claimed Todd had been killed by a tall man and buried at the base of a mountain near Seven Devils. Skeptical but desperate, the authorities followed her lead, dispatching 7 teams with search dogs to the location Lynn described. The teams worked tirelessly, driven by the hope of finally uncovering the truth. But despite their best efforts, the search ended in frustration and heartbreak. No new clues emerged, and Lynn's vision, like so many other leads, turned out to be a dead end. By October 21st, the case hit a dead end. Exhausted and with no evidence to justify continuing, the authorities made the difficult decision to call off the search. The official conclusion was that Todd Hofflander's disappearance was unsolvable, and the case was closed. His family was left with a void of unanswered questions and the faint, lingering hope that someday, somehow, the mountains would reveal their secrets.
In Idaho County, the remains of Todd William Hofflander have now been positively identified. The Idaho County coroner confirmed this using DNA analysis. The 39-year-old was last seen late September of 2010 while backpacking with a friend.
Was Bigfoot responsible? It wasn't until nearly a decade later, in April 2020, that fate intervened in the most chilling way imaginable. A hunter venturing into the untamed wilderness near the mouth of Bernard Creek came across a gruesome discovery. Scattered among the underbrush was a set of human bones. The scene was eerily quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath for 10 long years. When the remains were turned over to the authorities, DNA testing soon confirmed what Todd's family had dreaded to hear. The bones belonged to Todd Hofflander. Nearby, the hunter had also found remnants of Todd's belongings, a weathered backpack, corroded binoculars, and a battered camera. There was one thing missing, however: Todd's .357 Magnum revolver. The camera, damaged by years of exposure to the elements, still contained a memory card that authorities managed to recover. The images it held were degraded, but intact enough to reveal snippets of Todd's final days. One photo in particular sent a collective chill down the spines of everyone who saw it. It was grainy and unfocused, yet unmistakably sinister. A shadowy, hulking figure lurking among the trees, its proportions far too large to be human. Was Lynn May right? With Todd's remains exposed to the harsh wilderness for so long, usable evidence was scarce. Forensic experts could determine little beyond the fact that his death had been tragic and untimely. Lacking concrete answers, the authorities ultimately ruled Todd's death as an accidental disappearance. But for those who saw that photo, a nagging question remained. Was Todd truly alone in those mountains? As the case closed once again, whispers began to circulate among locals. Stories of the Sawtooth Wilderness being home to something otherworldly. A towering, elusive creature with the same descriptions of a Bigfoot. To Todd's loved ones, however, one thing was clear. The mountains had kept their secrets well, and whatever Todd encountered out there would remain one of nature's darkest mysteries. The mystery surrounding Todd Hofflander's disappearance and the discovery of his remains 10 years later still leaves everyone scratching their heads. The questions surrounding what happened to him in the wilderness have turned into a puzzle that people can't stop thinking about. From online forums to true crime groups, everyone is trying to figure out the strange details of his case. One of the most puzzling elements is Todd's dog, Ruby. When she was found, she was surprisingly healthy, apart from being a little dehydrated. For a dog raised in a household, surviving alone in the wild for so long seems almost impossible. The wilderness is home to cougars, wolves, and bears, all of which could have posed a danger to her. Yet, Ruby managed to survive, raising questions about whether someone or something might have been helping her. Adding to the mystery was the fact that her collar and dog pack were missing. Who took them off and why? People wondered whether Todd was trying to free her to increase her chances of survival, or if someone else was involved in removing her gear. Then there's the matter of Todd's missing revolver. As an experienced outdoorsman, Todd would have known the importance of carrying a gun, especially in a remote area where predators could strike at any moment. His revolver wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. Yet when his belongings were found near his remains, the gun was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the biggest mystery of all is why Todd left the meeting point in the first place. With his knee injury, staying put seemed like the safest and smartest option. He had enough food, water, and a sleeping bag to wait for Jeff to return with help. Leaving the spot only made things more dangerous for him, especially with his injury slowing him down. So why did he decide to move? Maybe something frightened him enough to make him abandon the area. Perhaps he was chasing after something or someone he thought could help. The decision to leave the meeting point doesn't make much sense, and it's one of the most frustrating parts of this case. If Todd had stayed where he was, his chances of survival might have been much higher. What's even stranger is where his remains were eventually found. Todd's bones were discovered near the mouth of Bernard Creek, a location that was dozens of miles away from the agreed-upon meeting point. For someone with an injured knee, making such a journey seems almost impossible. The rough terrain alone would have been a challenge, let alone the added difficulty of moving with an injury. This raises even more questions. Perhaps Todd somehow managed to push through the pain and make the trek himself, or he was moved there by someone or something after his death. Without more evidence, it's hard to say for sure. The sheer distance between where he was last seen and where his remains were found is a puzzling detail that continues to confuse investigators and armchair detectives alike. These unanswered questions have kept Todd Hofflander's case alive in people's minds long after the official investigation came to a close. On top of that, they still wonder how Ruby survived for so long on her own and what happened to Todd's revolver. Some believe it was a tragic accident, while others, like Lynn, think there might be a more sinister explanation lurking in the shadows. Yet this is not the only mysterious disappearance in Bigfoot territory. The bizarre disappearance of Brian Lee Johnston. On the cold morning of August 22, 2013, Brian Lee Johnston rose early from his home in the quiet Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. He did not wake his wife. Instead, he left a note on the table and stepped into the dark, beginning what should have been a short, peaceful hike on a trail he had likely memorized long ago. That was the last time he would be seen at home. At 71, Brian was no stranger to the outdoors. He had spent his life wrapped in nature's silence. On top of that, he had served in the Air Force until 1970, then built his career as an engineer for Seattle City Light until he retired. He wore his thick white hair in a ponytail, a simple fix for hair that never thinned. Besides that, Brian was an Eagle Scout, a builder, a man of calm routine who hiked with purpose, never for thrills. Even in older age, he kept himself strong and sharp, still carrying the quiet discipline of someone who knew how to survive. The trail he chose that day was the Ozette Loop, a 9-mile circuit deep in Olympic National Park. The first leg stretches northwest for 3 miles on a plank path that cuts through damp forest. Then the trail spills onto the wild Pacific coast, where waves beat against driftwood and jagged rocks. For another 3 miles, hikers press along the sand and stone, brushing past seaweed, tide pools, and the weight of the open ocean. Then it curves inland again, climbing gently through more dense woodland until it folds back on itself, returning to the trailhead. For all its beauty, this trail has moods, and sometimes the ocean pushes too close. Still, it was a loop, not a maze. After going for the hike, Brian's truck was found parked at the trailhead, untouched. Inside were receipts from Port Angeles, dated the very same morning. He had passed through town since he had planned for this hike, yet no one reported seeing him on the trail. No hikers, no rangers, no cameras. He was simply gone. The forest did not speak. There was no evidence of injury, no signs of confusion, no wrong turn to blame, and the trail was straightforward. But something had reached into that loop and taken him. And so the search began. 50 men and one boot. By August 28, 2013, 6 days had passed since Brian vanished into the quiet green of Olympic National Park. His wife and stepchildren, having waited longer than they should have, finally called the park rangers. It was then that the search began, too late, and already haunted by the feeling that something had gone wrong the moment he stepped onto the trail. For 3 days, the Ozette Wilderness swarmed with searchers. More than 50 people came in, rangers and rescue crews from Clallam, Grays Harbor, and Pierce counties. They swept the plank trails, scanned the forest floor, and trudged the open beach. The plank path was too direct to lose yourself on, but the beach section, battered by rising tides and sharp headlands, offered just enough danger to raise fears. A misstep there, a slip on wet stone, and the ocean could pull a man under with no trace. But there was nothing. No broken brush, no dropped gear, no pack, no torn clothing. And to make matters worse, the dogs caught no scent. The air yielded nothing, and the trees didn't answer. It was as if the forest had pulled its curtains tight and kept him hidden. Helicopters circled above, and volunteers trudged below. Every inch was checked, yet still, no sign. Some believe Brian might have changed his route. His sister thought he might have detoured toward Nia Bay or Sekiu, remote trails where old family memories lingered. But no one could prove he ever left the Ozette Loop. Years passed, and in 2017, a hiker walking that same trail stumbled on something strange. A single boot, weather-worn, left behind like a breadcrumb. It matched Brian's size, and his family confirmed it looked just like the pair he had taken. That lone boot was the only piece ever found. The forest gave nothing else back. Not a voice, not a clue. Only the sound of wind in the trees and a trail that still leads out, but never explains what waits in between. While many theorized what might have happened, one thing was clear. Brian vanished without a trace in Olympic National Park, a place long whispered about in Bigfoot lore. Dense forests, remote trails, and eerie silence surround the Ozette Loop. With no body, no clues, and only a lone boot found years later, the wilderness swallowed him like legend, and yet the numbers keep going up. John Devine's case. At 73, John Devine entered the Olympic wilderness on September 6, 1997, carrying only snack bars and determination. He was headed to the dangerous slopes of Mount Baldy, planning to follow the steep, rugged Maynard Burn Trail into the heart of Olympic National Park, a place few dared to tread alone. John lived in Sequim and had tackled long hikes before, even with limited vision in one eye, but this trail tested even the hardiest. He set off from a campsite on Grey Wolf Ridge that cold afternoon, leaving behind a life of routine and a quiet home that expected him back the next day. When he failed to return on September 7th, his family reported him missing, and the search began under an uneasy sky. Rangers and volunteers traced his intended path through the thick forest, where brambles clawed at legs and every step threatened a hidden drop. At 5,000 feet, a Bell 205A1 rescue helicopter climbed into the imposing peaks of Mount Baldy, but fate turned on a knife's edge when the helicopter crashed during its mission. In the crash, 3 lives were lost: pilot Kevin Johnston, volunteer dog handler Rita McMahon, and park employee Taryn Hoover, while 2 more lay wounded, and others carried the shock of that fall through the forest. That crash forced a grim pause on the search, as snow moved in and the terrain became a frozen labyrinth of rock and ice. Meanwhile, a dozen searchers pressed on at Muller Creek, picking through drainages and steep walls that choked off any easy path through the tangled undergrowth. Each footstep was cautious, whispering through chill air, the forest leaning in like a living wall closing tight around them. Sergeant Don Kelly of the Clallam County Sheriff's Office admitted the bleak reality. If John was alive, he would have been found by now. If not, his body would still be somewhere visible on that savage slope. Then, around September 13th, the search ended after no trace of John Devine was found. No pack, no trail, no footprint. Only the knowledge that the mountain swallowed him, leaving no echo to follow. Following the crash, tales grew. How the helicopter's fall had stirred something dormant in the mountain's soul. But soon after, winter dressed the ridges in snow, burying paths and scent trails alike, hiding John's fate under a blanket of cold indifference. The forest returned to its hush, punctuated only by the wind in high branches and the slow drip of melting snow. No rescue flares, no animal bears, no final sign of John. Just the vertical walls of forest pressed in tight on him, and a mountain still holding its secrets. In the years since, hikers speak of gray shapes in the mist, of footprints that vanish near cliffs, and of the low cry of wind that sounds like a voice calling from the trees. But for John Devine, the forest said nothing. It kept silent and swallowed him.